Okay, pets. Love them, hate them, love our own, every one of us. I don't know about you all, but my dog's the best dog in the whole world. And I know Shane's dog is the best dog in the whole world because we share a dog. Dave, do you have a dog?
Not anymore. The kids left. They grew up.
Well, yeah, all of us, we love our pets and have the best dogs in the whole world. So let me stop sharing my screen. Stop share. How do I do that again? Stop. Does anyone remember how to stop a screen share? Apparently. I don't remember how.
Click the same button that you click to share the screen, I believe.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Logan. I cannot wait to hear what Logan Miller of Our Pet Policy has to say. Logan, since I'm already stumbling, will you please introduce yourself to the group?
Yeah, just real quick. So my name's Logan Miller, and I started off probably like a lot of you. I bought a duplex when I was 22 as my first home, and lived in the top half, rented the bottom half. And I was surprised. I rented mostly to college students, and I was surprised at how many of them wanted pets, wanted emotional support animals. But because I lived in the unit with them, I was able to say, hey, we don't have to allow them. Here's a pet fee, and they all paid the pet fee. Which really surprised me, paying $300 non-refundable to live in there 6 months for a cat just kind of blew my mind. But had a lot of them do that, and then some other family members, we jumped in. We've got 21 units right now, and quite a few fourplexes. And we were having a property management, kind of run those, and had a no pets policy in those. And all of a sudden, as we're driving by visiting or fixing things, it's like, oh, this one has a pet, that one has a pet. Checking in with the property management, and they're like, yeah, we don't know about that pet or this pet. And so we finally cracked down on it, and it's like, all right, who all has pets? And 16 of them had pets, and we had a no pet policy. And they were all just claiming ESA, emotional support animals. And the property manager, all they required was a letter, and they'd say, okay, you're good to go. And so we're like, well, there's got to be something we can do. And anyways, we jumped online, and you can buy an emotional support animal letter. We found them as cheap as $29. You can buy them, and they look legitimate. They're written by licensed therapists a lot of times. And anyway, talked with Idaho Fair Housing, and they're really good at telling you what you can't do. But as far as telling you what you can do or how to go about it, they're not there to help you. And so anyways, it took a while to kind of figure it out, but it's like, hey, if we've figured it out for us, we ought, there's probably lots of other people in the same boat. And so we've talked with companies that have, 40,000 units that, have the same struggles and haven't come up with a good solution for it. So, so we're happy to, to share what we've learned and make it easier for other people. And
it's a huge topic. And especially when the ESA and the companion animal thing first came out, whenever we brought it up at the club, we'd get bombarded. People just couldn't believe they could be forced to have a pet. And, so we do the rounds where we'd say, well, a companion animal isn't a pet. It's more like a creature. You have to look at it like a wheelchair. It's a companion animal. It's different. But a lot of landlords have really felt cornered and felt like they have been taken advantage of in some of those fake letters. And one thing that's important, and I don't know all the specifics on this one, but owners of 1 to 4 units, you are in a slightly safer category, I believe, in terms of anybody who has 5+ units out there is pretty much in a position to be treated just like any property management business. You don't really get a hall pass. 1 to 4 units, the laws apply the same to you, but I believe, do you know about that, Logan, about how it's slightly more gentle or less enforceable on those folks?
Yeah. So, so if you live in the unit, especially, it's real easy to say, sorry, no, even, to service animals, in some instances. If you own your own and manage your own, like you said, with 4 or less units, same thing, you can not allow emotional support animals, but as far as service animals, there's a little different law around those, but correct.
Mhm. Okay. Well, Logan, let's delve into it. Let's hear all about it. What's the numbers on this, and how does our pet policy work? What can you tell us? Do you want to
Yeah.
share your screen? Are you allowed to share your screen, or do I have to push special buttons to allow you?
Yeah, I think you gotta push a button to allow.
All participants. Okay. I think you can do it.
Perfect.
Logan Miller with Our Pet Policy, here to speak to AVID investors. Logan, teach us.
Yeah, and I'm gonna move this around a little bit. Anyways, I threw a bunch of things in here that I thought you guys, that anyone would feel, have a lot of interest in. And one of the big questions we come up on is people that have had a no pets policy for a long time and then are realizing that, hey, we just have a lot of pets in our unit anyways. Is it worth it to go pets allowed? And anyways, and these stats come from customers that we're currently working with. And I'm sure as we work with more and more, maybe these stats will change a little bit, but here's what we've seen so far. So the 10% unauthorized pets, that's if you keep a pretty good handle on things. We found some that have, up to 40% unauthorized pets, where, those property managers just aren't checking that, or, don't really care about that. But even though if you have a no pets policy, unless you're, 4 units or less, you're going to see, 15 to 40% assistance animals, kind of depending a little bit on your demographic, and then also depending on, how you're checking those and vetting those. And like I said, in our one instance, we had over 75% of them were assistance animals. And then just if we were to put some statistics to it, and like you said, one-on-one, these can greatly change, but on average, if you have excessive damage from a pet, an average would be $2,500. We've seen it all the way up to $10,000. And that's, damage that goes above and beyond what the security deposit is going to cover. And so at a rate of 4%, let's say, to make the math easy, you had 100 units, you're going to be in at $10,000 in repairs for that, per year. And so your net profit on that would be negative 10,000. When you move over to pets allowed, if you do a good job at it, usually you can get, 50% of your tenants paying a pet fee and pet deposit. And we'll go over those, the numbers that are most often charged. You still have, so this one includes assistance animals and unauthorized pets. And we're building some, we have some tools built that helps, reduce those numbers. But the average renters, on average, renters have, 72% of renters have a pet or have an animal. Like Stacy said, you're not allowed to call assistance animals pets. So if you call them animals, then you're set. And then, so you've got about twice as many animals, if you allow pets. And so that moves up to 8%. So you're going to have $20,000 in repairs, out of 100 units. But then your pet revenue, is going to be, the numbers we use puts it right at, 51,600. So after you take out your 20,000 in repairs, you've got a net profit of 31,000, which is, if you look at it, is $41,000 above, if you don't allow pets. So, the averages, average out to where, you should come out ahead. But, if you only have a few units and, like we said, sometimes these damages can come up to, up to $10,000 from what we've seen damage from pets. If you only have a few units and you're not ready for something like that, then, it could be a little safer having a no pets policy.
Well, I think the big thing that we get is, if you have a no pets policy, we all love our pets. For a while there, it got so hard for tenants to rent a place with pets that they were forced to find creative solutions, and they've done it. But it still takes some effort to go online and get a letter. Maybe not that part. Maybe that doesn't take effort. But if you're really doing it right, it takes some effort to go to the doctor and get a letter. And if you're giving them another avenue where they can have their pet, they're not going to be necessarily cornered into getting that letter. You know, they may just pay the deposit and pay the pet rent, because we still can't pay the pet rent if it's a support animal. It's not a pet, so we don't charge pet rent, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
So what we're counting on here is that if they're given an opportunity to bring their pets, they're not going to have to go through the route to claim ESA. Is that? Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. I think we see that in practice all the time. It's totally legit.
Yep. Yeah. And like you said, some people that, need to find a workaround, even if, like you said, if they do go to a legitimate therapist, it doesn't take very much to, tell them, hey, I get stressed and this animal, helps me with my anxiety. I don't know what I'd do without it, which is what all pets are. We all love our pets, and, they make us feel good. Right. But yeah, someone that, doesn't mind paying the deposit and the fees, and understands why they're paid, probably would pay that if pets were allowed. But if, they inherit, their, a parent dies and leaves them a pet and they're emotionally attached to it, but you have a no pets policy, that they're probably going to look pretty hard to find a way around that. So.
Mm-hmm. And we had a comment from Leslie about the differentiation between service animals and companion animals. And I think that is a really good point to make at this, because we obviously want to accommodate. We don't want to keep out folks with with a real need. So can you define the difference between those two, Logan?
Yeah. So a service animal is specifically trained and to alleviate a disability. And so they have to have specific training. They can't be, in training, they have to be trained to do a specific task, and you're allowed to ask, what task is this, dog trained to do? You're not allowed to ask, what disability do you have that you need this dog for? And so, there's some real tricky, ways that, you got to make sure that you ask the right questions. Otherwise,
it's a hugely different caliber of animal, because a service animal is trained. And so, and the problem that we've seen is with the emotional support animal or a companion animal, folks have, I believe it's safe to say, abused the system and forced people to have untrained pets into their units and caused a lot of damage with no additional deposit. So I think that's the reason this has been such a hot topic. Is that what you're seeing as well, Logan? Yeah.
And I think part of the reason too is, there's people out there making money, and we'll go over all the websites that are doing it, but if you Google, pets and rentals, those are the first, ads that pop up on Google all the time is, hey, no pets policy, no problem. Get an ESA letter here, or register your service animal here. And you go on there to register it, and, you don't even have to tell it what it's trained to do. It just lets you register it and sells you a printed off card that says, this animal is a registered service animal. Mm-hmm. And so it's just so easy, and there's so much advertising for it that, that people are doing it because it's the loophole.
Can I comment on this?
Yeah.
Please.
So I have a little bit of experience with service animals and companion animals. So first of all, there is no service animal letter. There's no certified service animal. It's all a made up, market. The questions that you can ask is, do you have a disability? And you can't ask what the disability is, but you can ask, do you have a disability? And then what is your animal trained to do as a service? So.
Mm-hmm. And one more thing to go along with that kind of helps it is, if it is a non-visible disability, you're allowed to follow up and verify that. And so if it's a blind person, they have an eye-seeing dog, that's definitely a visible disability, and you let it go there. if it's someone that's in a wheelchair and their dog pulls them where they go, then, there's no verification needed. But if it's someone that says, this dog is a diabetes alert dog, and that's not something that you can see, you can request further verification.
And I think you had a slide on this, didn't you, Logan?
Yeah, I have several slides on that go through some of that. So maybe we're jumping ahead a little bit, but here's just the typical pet fees that we've seen across the board, here in Idaho. Yeah, and they differ too. Some people it's all pet fees, some it's all pet deposit. I kind of like some of each. I think if there is some pet deposit that they will get back if there isn't damage, they're going to be more likely to to want to keep that and keep the place a little better. Pet rent is 90% of the people we work with charge a pet rent. Usually it's $25 to $35 per month. And then an unauthorized pet fee. We see a lot of people that don't have an unauthorized pet fee. And then, when you catch someone with an animal, they're like, oh, hey, I, hid this animal for 8 months, at $30 a month, I saved a lot of money. So, so they're kind of, there's no recourse for them, for trying to hide an animal. So an unauthorized pet fee or animal fee is the way, is good to have. And then a violation fee. So we onboarded one property. They had a lot of pet waste issues, and their pet waste fee was $5. And it's like, man, you go out, and your dog leaves a mess there and you forgot a bag. It's like, oh man, worst case scenario, I get fined $5. Okay, I'm willing to run that risk, but if it's more expensive, like $100, tenants are going to be, oh, hey, that's worth running back up and grabbing a bag for. Any questions on pet fees, violations, or any things that you guys would add to that, as far as violations that you guys have seen?
I think you're right. It's a great point on the $5 being too little of a fee. There was a study, and I can't remember which book it was in or where it was, but when they fined folks for showing up late to pick up their kids from daycare, the parents looked at the fine and said, okay, I'll pay the fine. But when they didn't have a fine and just said, hey, our folks have been with their kids all day and they have families and they want to go home, and guilted them, they showed up on time. And so, if you have too little of a fine, it's just like, okay, yeah, I'll pay that. And, $5 does seem like a small price to pay to not have to pick up after your pet.
I'm still not clear. So if somebody has a service animal, then we can't charge fees. Is that correct?
That's correct. So, or collect a pet deposit for it either. So if it's an emotional support animal or a service animal, you can't collect, the pet deposit, the pet fee, or the pet rent.
It would be like charging someone a fee for having a cane or a crutch. You just wouldn't do that.
However, when they leave and they're, if their animal has caused damage, at that point you can charge for the damage. But as we all know, if that damage goes above and beyond the security deposit, it's, really hard to get that back.
Logan, this is I have a quick question on this charge for pet waste or being off leash, etc. Have you had much luck in actually collecting those fines and fees, or is it more of just a deterrent?
Yeah. So, more of a deterrent, and part of it is that, it's just hard to prove, right? Who left that pet waste and stuff. But so a lot of times what we'll have, in the few instances that, there's been a problem, they'll just send a message out to the tenants, hey, we're having an issue with pet waste, at this spot. If you can, if you see someone doing that, that's gross, and we want to better our community, hey, here's, $50 to anyone that sends us, some proof of who's doing it, so we can fix the problem. And then all of a sudden the tenants, they want their living area to be clean and nice and stuff. And all of a sudden, and maybe the perpetrator, I guess, sees that as well and is like, oh, I'm not going to get caught. And, so far that seemed to solve a lot of the issues, but yeah, we've had a few of them, that got caught and got the fine. And if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to type it in the chat, but there's also a product where you can do DNA testing on feces, if you were willing to invest in that.
And it costs about $60 per dog to get it tested and send it in and get it on file. And then the ones that we have that do that, say it's about a 50% chance that they'll get a match to it.
Yeah, but it would instill the fear of God.
Yeah.
It does sound pretty scary.
Yeah, at that point, if your dog had been tested, there's no way you'd leave that out there, right? And a lot of those guys have like a $250 fine once, if they catch you leaving it after that, because it costs them $60 to test it every time too.
So are emotional support animals and service animals classified together? So we'll own only 2 units. So I know some of the laws won't apply necessarily to us. But I was thinking that you were not allowed to not allow service animals, but you could not allow emotional support animals. I didn't know if they were the same or if they were different.
Yeah. So service animals are allowed to go, pretty much anywhere with a person that needs that service animal, right? Like grocery stores, hotels, short-term rentals, Airbnbs and stuff. Whereas emotional support animals are only allowed in long-term housing. And so if you do an Airbnb, you wouldn't have to allow emotional support animals and stuff. But but they've also said, for people that manage their own properties and have 4 units or less, that you don't have to allow the emotional support animals, but correct, you still do the service animals.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We'll jump through here. You guys probably know a lot of these already, but pros and cons to allowing pets. You have a bigger tenant pool. Like we said, 72% of renters, have a pet. Increased rent. A lot of times, even just the rent without the pet rent can be more, if you have the same property and one that allows pets or doesn't allow pets. And then if you allow pets, you're prepared for those animals. You've kind of thought that process through. Whereas if you, plan on having a no pets policy and then all of a sudden there are pets, maybe you haven't written in a pet waste policy. There's a lot of things to be ready for animals that, that if you allow animals that you'd be prepared for. Typically they're, longer residency. On average, you get 6 months longer with someone that has a pet versus someone that doesn't have a pet. And then like we talked about earlier, there is some, less ESA fraud because people can pay, to have the pet that they want there versus, ending up with a pet they really want and having to find a workaround and go in the the fraudulent ESA route. Cons, there is some more, there is more damage. It could be interior, it could be landscaping on the outside. Pets, peeing in the grass, leaving the urine stains there, killing the grass. You have to deal with.
And do you know why some of the pets leave urine stains and some of them don't?
Yeah, so it depends on the size of them, right? So the bigger the pet, that's peeing, the more ammonia, the more nitrogen that's in there. And yeah, it's just basically too much nitrogen going in there that it burns the plants. And we'll talk about there's some enzymes they give them in these little tablets. You give your dog one a day and it'll actually reduce that, the ammonia, kind of the potency of it to where it doesn't burn the grass near as much. And so, something you could ask, or, at least let your tenants know, here's one solution. And then odor, especially pets that are neglected a little bit, always leaving odor. And then there are, extra liabilities, especially around, dogs that, and not as much in single family homes, but, fourplexes or apartment complexes, that one tenant's dog could bite somebody and create a lawsuit. All right. So, and this is one that a lot of the people we talk to are kind of fascinated with. So there's over 70 websites that we found that sell ESA letters, here in Idaho. And I'll show you a couple of these that we've got. So we're building a database of them. And so we know, who's writing them and, and can spot them. And the ones that I got, as you're filling it out, it asks you all these questions, do you feel, are you anxious? Are you depressed? And one of them says, do you feel stressed because of COVID? And I click sometimes, and that was the only one that I clicked. And you get down to the end and it says, congratulations, you qualify for an ESA letter, because I sometimes feel stressed because of COVID. And they're signed by licensed health professionals. And then if you ask to do a verification, so you want to verify that therapist wrote that letter for that tenant, that they didn't just, get on Word and type it up themselves. A lot of times they'll charge the tenant another $40 to $70 to respond, to that accommodation request. And so they're, trying to make money coming and going. But yeah, if you guys are ever on Google, type in the word ESA or type in ESA letter and just see how many there are that just pop up and say, get your ESA letter now. And in January of 2020, HUD came out and said specifically that, letters that are bought online and based off of a questionnaire and or short interview, are not considered valid. And then the hard part is just, proving that they were, that is the case. So here's two that come from the same website. This one's emotionalpetsupport.com. And what we found is on these ones, they have the letter template, and then they just, put in the name of the therapist, or off to the right here, in this case, it's a medical doctor. And, they say the exact same thing. And basically, you pay them the $50 and an hour later, they email you this. And anyway, so, they don't, it's not legitimate at all. Any questions on fraudulent ESA letters?
I did speak to First Rate Property Management about this, and they said they too had spoken with Fair Housing in Idaho, which anyone with more than 4 units, particularly, you never want to take on Fair Housing or HUD. It's just, they're true advocates, but it's a slippery slope is what First Rate said. They recognize that HUD does not recognize some of these letters, and they're interested in seeing what HUD's response ends up being on these, but they did seem to have a bit of a cautious approach to it. But Fair Housing at least validated that HUD does not recognize these, Idaho Fair Housing. Mm-hmm. Which of course you already know, Logan, but.
Yeah, so we work with Idaho Fair Housing, and and they're there to advocate for the tenants, and I think they show their worth by, suing landlords, for not accommodating the tenants. And so we were asking them, so we asked them, hey, what's a good way to make sure that, these aren't fraudulent letters? And they said, well, we just recommend that you trust the tenant. And it's like, well, that's not going to work. We already know that doesn't work. Anyways, but in HUD, HUD allows you to verify them. It's just kind of, they don't specifically say how. There are several things they say that you can't do. And so we worked with, 18 different lawyers so far in 14 different states to make sure that, we're riding that fine line to, staying on, our side of, HUD and fair housing and so that we don't, get in trouble by them.
Hey, question about the number. There's like you mentioned the number of units limitation. I'm just curious if you have, say, multiple LLCs, can you use say if you have an LLC and it only has like 4 units in that one LLC, does that count as like, against those minimum number of units or maximum number of units?
Yeah, that's a good question. You might be able to get away with it, but if someone pointed out that, hey, this person owns and manages more than 4 units, then you'd probably get in trouble. But on paper, you could probably get away with it. But I think if someone was able to prove that you actually did own more than 4 units and you managed those yourself, that you'd probably get in trouble. But
Thanks.
I'm not a lawyer and can't say that specifically, but that's what I would guess.
I had called on it when the law first came out, Shane, and at that time I was managing ours and it was more than 4. And so we didn't fall into that 1 to 4 unit loophole. And then if you were using a property manager, of course, then they would not fall into that loophole. So the loophole, I think, is really only for people who truly own only 1 to 4 doors. So either 1 fourplex or 4 single families or less.
Some do's and don'ts around verification. I think, you want to let your tenants know that, hey, all, accommodation requests that are for non-visible disabilities are going to get verified. Otherwise, word spreads really fast. If one tenant has a dog and it's a no pets policy, the other, tenant's going to be, hey, how do you get a dog? It says no dog. Oh, an ESA letter. And so you want to make sure that they know that, hey, we're going to verify that. And then the best, one of the tools that we use is an animal accommodations form that we've created that we'll have the health professional fill out that recommended it. And just having a robust one that asks all the right questions is kind of the key to spotting these ones that are from the website or are fraudulent. The don'ts, don't depend on an untrained, property manager to verify it. We work with one company, they had a property manager that hadn't been around very long and denied an ESA, and they got sued. It started out at $250,000 and they ended up settling for $62,000. And, and that came out of the owners. And needless to say, that property manager, he doesn't work for them anymore, but they had to go through that whole process. And anyways, so whoever's doing the verification, you want to make sure that they know, what they can ask, what they can't. And then
well, and it's been a hot topic. I know that they have shoppers call the property managers and ask about an emotional service animal, and they're trying to catch a misstep. So some of the folks have heard for first rate story on this, where as soon as someone mentions emotional support animal, they actually have a script that they need to read from that they've verified with Fair Housing and HUD, because they felt like they'd sort of been, the word that comes to mind is entrapped, but I don't know that they said that, but they had someone ask about an emotional support animal, and first rate said the right thing. Well, an emotional support animal is not a pet, so any pet deposits would not apply with an emotional support animal. And even in the transcript, you could then see, well, then they said, well, what if I have a pet? Do you charge a pet deposit? And it was said in a sort of tricky way that the person felt like, okay, they're asking now about pet deposits, and and so they got zinged for that. It was just a tricky transcript. So.
And if you go on to Idaho Fair Housing's website, you can volunteer to be a tester, to go and kind of run those stings on property managers or landlords. And anyway, so that's they do that all the time.
I didn't know you could volunteer. That's crazy or interesting.
I know I want to get on there as a volunteer just to see how they work, right?
How do you verify non-visible accommodation requests? So are you asking for a diagnosis?
No, what you can do is you can create a reasonable accommodations form that probably the safest way is you have the tenant give it to the health professional that filled it out for them and ask questions. You can ask, is this tenant that's requesting it, they are a patient of yours, they do have a disability that requires an emotional support animal. And, you can go through and ask those questions. And then on ours, which I'd recommend from everyone is, you ask that health professional to submit it directly to you so that, because if you hand a tenant a paper, and then they bring it back filled out, it's kind of like, a seventh grader, letting them take their test home, right? Or, who knows what's going to happen with that. Anyway, so that's what we do is we have the health professional send it directly to us so that we know it was filled out by them.
So Logan, they don't come to you with a letter already, or even if they do, you say, that's nice, but here's our own form, which you now need to take to your mental health professional and get our particular accommodations form filled out. Is that what you do?
Yep, correct.
I see.
And then, the biggest don't ask any questions regarding their disability. You can ask all the questions about the animal and, the process that the letter was written. But you don't want to ask anything about that person's disability. Although a lot of times in the ESA letters, they tell you specifically, it's because of anxiety or it's because of depression, but you don't want to be caught ever asking what the disability is.
So it seems like requiring that special, like, let's say a person's already done that in their prior residence. Do you accept if they bring that to you, or it has to be new again, specific to this particular rental?
Yeah, so typically, an ESA letter is kind of like a prescription. And so if it's over a year old, you can ask, and what we do is in the accommodations request form, that they send out, one of the reasons, even if a tenant has been in a unit and they've already filled out an accommodations form, after a year, we'll have them do another one to make sure that, that is still a prescription that doctor recommends. Cause basically that's what it is a prescription to help their disability. And so they can be asked every year, but even if they come with a letter and an accommodations form, that they've had filled out before, our accommodations form is different, has, more questions on it. And so we have them fill out ours anyways.
So what I've had happen a few times is that the person will tell me that they have the letter, and I'll say something like, that's great, we'll go ahead and charge the animal deposit, and then when I get that letter and it's verified, then we can reimburse those funds. And then you never hear anything more because they probably actually don't have it. What do you think of that strategy?
Yep. Yeah, no, that's a great strategy. If they have a friend or someone that's gotten away with it, like I said, these ones online now, they guarantee 100% that if the landlord doesn't accept it, that they'll refund their money. And so a lot of these, are getting pretty brave. And even if it's bought online, they'll give it to you. But I think that's a good strategy either way, is to say, oh, if we haven't gotten it already, we'll charge it and can reimburse you, once you've given us the proper paperwork and it's verified.
Okay. Sorry to dominate the questions, but I've had these questions for a while. One thing that I've done is to say that that the letter has to be from a local provider. a local mental health professional, so their address has to be, you know, within a reasonable, like in the Treasure Valley. What are your thoughts about that?
And so they just have to be licensed. Well, so for here in Idaho, for a therapist to be giving therapy and I guess prescriptions or write an ESA letter, they need to be licensed in the state of Idaho. But if legally, let's say it's here in the Treasure Valley and they have one from Coeur d'Alene, I think you can't, typically, you couldn't deny it if it was a licensed therapist in the state of Idaho, especially where teletherapy is getting more, used more and more. But like these fraudulent ones I showed you right here, the Laura Purdy, she's licensed in over 40 states. And so she's actually licensed in the state of Idaho as a medical doctor. And she still writes these, fake, or lets them put her name on these fake ESA letters. And, and then another, and I guess it came out right at COVID as well. So in Idaho, if a tenant in the last year, has moved here and they were seeing a therapist in another state, because of COVID, they came out with a rule that was still fine, that tenant could, or that therapist or doctor could make prescriptions for it. And so even if it isn't licensed in the state of Idaho, you'd have to ask them, was it because of a recent move, or had you known this therapist before you moved to Idaho or something like that?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great question. Here's some common things that we find people leave out of their pet policies that they definitely shouldn't. And this goes for, we have some, sorry, I'm trying to move it so I can see them all. This goes for, people with a few units all the way up to people with lots of units. As we're going through their leases, sometimes it's like, you've got this many units and, you don't have this in your lease. So we talked about the importance of an unauthorized animal fee, clear and precise waste instructions. We got a couple of pictures here to show you that maybe you guys will get a kick out of after this, but you want to tell them exactly what's expected when it comes to waste instructions. Animal visitation instructions. And so a lot of times tenants will try and get out of it. Hey, you got caught with an unauthorized pet. Oh, it's not my pet. It's my brother's dog who's visiting, or it's my mother's emotional support animal, or, and there's all sorts of crazy things that we've heard. And so having specific instructions, that, hey, it needs to get approved before it comes. And even if you don't allow animals to visit, there's always that case that someone's going to come visit with a service dog. And so you're just asking them to let you know and ahead of time. Clear violations on what's expected, especially with fourplexes, that have a maintenance crew that comes to mow the lawn every week. They have people, that'll put dog stakes in the ground and leave them there, and then the lawnmower hits it, and they have to pay for it. So that'll be something that's listed specifically as a violation. Restricted areas, pets are not allowed. And so this is a big one. Yeah, especially, around fourplexes as well, is, if you designate one certain spot to be a pet relief area, that kind of helps protect the rest of your grass and makes it, makes it to where it's just one smaller area that you're maintaining and keeping all your other landscape looking really nice. Procedure for adding an animal to the lease. If you don't have that written out exactly what they're expected to do before the animal comes on the property, they'll try getting out of an unauthorized animal fee, saying, they didn't know exactly what they were supposed to do. And then, easy access to pictures and vaccination records, being able to identify the animal, and then also keeping up to date on vaccinations is one spot. Normally, if a tenant's dog were to bite someone or a cat or whatever, they're liable for it. But if a typical dog bite costs $30,000, and so if they go to sue that other tenant and they're not going to get that money from it, if they can prove that that dog could have had rabies and that the landlord didn't do their due diligence in making sure that it was a safe dog, then all of a sudden you could get wrapped up in that lawsuit as well. Any questions on this slide? Sorry, this one. I'm doing more reading than I should. Let's go. For some reason, there we go. All right, so on the left here, this one kind of goes back to not giving specific, waste management instructions, right? So this tenant just took a closet, with carpet in it, filled it full of kitty litter, and that was their litter box. I could only imagine.
Oh my God.
And then the one on the right, if you don't talk about animal visitations and stuff, there's tenants that get caught pet sitting. And so, they have tons and tons of pets. On our website, we have a resource that goes through talking about ways to keep your landscape looking great. And we talked about the specific animal relief area, and also if you have fake grass in that animal relief area, like we're talking about, then you don't have to worry about the urine burning the grass from too much nitrogen. And then you also want to have, a good sand base in there and have it being watered so that it can wash that out and doesn't have a permanent smell. And then, there's pet urine neutralizers that greatly reduce the amount of ammonia in their urine. And so instead of it burning the grass and causing the grass to die for, 3 or 4 weeks in a spot, it's like, it'll turn slightly brown for a few days and then it's back to green and keeps the lawns looking a lot better. Fertilizing schedules. If you have a backyard where they keep their dog, you want to make sure that one gets fertilized with a fertilizer with low nitrogen, versus maybe the front yard that the dogs aren't peeing in as much. And then making sure it's clear who's in charge of keeping the landscaping looking great, and in the case that their animals damage it, that they are responsible for that repair and keeping it looking good.
And so then, when you, Logan, before we jump into some of these, which were, I think this is where you kind of I told you some of my questions, so it looks like you're starting to answer them there. I love that. Thank you. Your company, Our Pet Policy, you do the screening for people. Is that correct? So if there's someone who manages their own property, but is like, I don't want to do the pet side of things, you deal with just the pet screening or the animal screening, depending on which it is.
Yeah. So we have a process where they can do it all online. They can, they upload their pictures, their vaccination records. We follow up with them when their vaccination records are coming due. We verify the ESA letters, so we're, verifying, 15 to 20 of those a day.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so then do the tenants typically pay that, and then you produce a yes or a no, or it's legit, or, how does that work?
Yeah. So right now, so we just charge a small monthly fee for the tenants that have animals. Anyway, so we'll give everyone, all the tenants, whether they have an animal or not, a login and so that they can get on our system, and then they can add a pet at any time or an animal visitation application, just so they have access to that. They can also get on there and report any pet issues that they're seeing. And so if, their neighbor's dog's barking at 3 a.m., it encourages them to give some evidence, right? A photo or a video, a video of the alarm clock in the middle of the night and the neighbor's dog just going crazy, so that it's not, he said versus she said type thing.
And
So it's
then
kind of-
do you, when someone signs up for your services, do you also then remind the landlord what terms they should have in their lease so they're all good?
Yeah. So we go so online. So it can be done completely online. And so it goes through and asks, about what fees they'd like to charge and give suggestions, and then pet rules. And it has some, you can select through a whole bunch of pet rules that are pre-made. But then we also, as we're reaching out to people, we'll walk through their pet lease versus our pet lease and see what they want to add versus what they don't want to add. And so it's kind of cool. We get to see, all sorts of pet leases and what other people are doing. And essentially that's, what's added to ours as well, as we see other people doing something that makes an impact also, that ends up on our pet lease as well. So.
And so then it's like a pet addendum, and then
Yep.
that's something they sign. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. And then a couple of other things that we're coming out with it. And I think if, any of you guys have any suggestions on something that'd be cool, we're always taking in ideas, but the next release, the next tool that's being added to it is the pet mapping tool. And so what we found is even, property managers, if they want to see if a tenant has a pet, they've got to go log into a system and drill down into the documents to see if they do have a pet and to find a picture of that pet. And maybe if, you own a fourplex or, that you manage yourself, maybe you'll know them a lot more on a personal level and will remember each one of those pets. But then the maintenance guys, if you have a property management company that's taking care of your property, the maintenance guys are going to have their own app. And so if there's a black dog running around without an owner, they could search, black dog, and it'll show all the black dogs on the property if there is some, or they see a cat in the window, they could quickly look up on, just type in that unit number and see if they're supposed to have a cat or not, and then take a picture and send it, as a violation. And then probably in Q2, we're going to have one come out that is a bunch of videos. So like if they have a dog, it'll ask them to go through and watch these videos, 10 ways to reduce the damage in your apartment from your dog. And so it just gives them some, good ways to help keep their dog from tearing up the apartment. And same thing with the cats as well. We'll have a whole section on, or video curriculum on cats.
Very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Are we good?
Yeah. So I have a pet problem. I have a listing, and it, we did the carpet and the paint, but there was still kind of some odor. I think that it was a bit of a cat house. And so I had asked Logan what tips and tricks he had for getting rid of some pet smells. And I think this is what you're getting into here. Is that true?
Yeah. So I added that. I sent Stacy a copy of this yesterday, and anyways, then she added that she wanted to ask this question. So I was like, oh, I'll add that in here. If we'll send a copy of this to anyone that wants it. And then if you ever want to refer back to it, then it's right in here. So locating the source of the odor is the biggest thing, right? And so if you close the blinds, you need it to be darker, but if you have a black light, that'll pick it up, and it like glows really bright if it's fresh and hasn't been cleaned a lot. But even if someone's took in and cleaned it really good, it'll still show up. And so usually by using that black light, you can see where the problem areas are. And then I also recommend every time that a tenant moves in or moves out, taking a video and just walking through the house with the blinds closed with that light to show where all the, where all those stains are, even before a tenant moves in. And then after the tenant moves out, doing it again. And if there is a smell and you charge them for replacing that carpet, if they, want to refute that, it's kind of on you to have proof that you needed to do it. And, that before and after video showing that it was them, that, that had all that, had left, their pets peeing in there, whatever it might be, you have that physical proof that, that there's no way they can refute it. But going to the second, this one right here, sometimes, so there's one that I helped do where, anyways, it had a ton of cats in it and smelled really, really bad. And they went in and, anyways, they didn't neutralize it, but they went in to seal it. And I was in charge of spraying the walls. I sprayed the walls from 6 feet down with the Kills primer. But then when they were, and then they were rolling the floors, but they didn't roll the floors near heavy enough. In a lot of spots, you could still see through the concrete or the subfloor, and they didn't put a good thick base on it. And then they put in brand new carpet, and it was kind of smelled like paint, for a couple of weeks. They had the brand new carpet, thought it was all good. As soon as the paint smell left, you could smell the cats again because they hadn't put it on thick enough on the floor. And so anyways, and so that's where, if the black light doesn't work, it could be someone tried to fix it by replacing the carpet and didn't take care of it in the subfloor. And so at that point, you're going to want to seal off each room, or air the house out the best you can, seal off each room, and then go back in and find out which room, is creating the problem, and you have to pull the carpet up and go from there again. But
or sometimes they don't treat the tack strips that hold the carpet down.
Yep. And sometimes it can get behind the trim, if they're peeing in a corner or something, and the trim isn't sealed off, the back of that trim usually isn't painted or stained. And so it can seep in that as well.
Have you found that shellac instead of paint would help seal it further if there's, if you're not really ready to replace all the trim in a house? And it's already been repainted.
And so you're saying if it's coming from the trim?
Yeah.
The smell? Yeah. So, and so there's these neutralizers that are called bioenzymatic, I guess, cleaners, anyways, that will actually go in, and they neutralize that ammonia. And so the best way to do it is, if you can spray that on there and you just get it wet and then let it dry. Or if it's in the carpet, you can actually spray it, saturate it to where it'll get all the way to the subfloor. If it's just in a small, one isolated spot, let it sit for 20 minutes and then vacuum up as much of the water as you can and let it dry. But in those cases, that way, at least it's in there killing it and you're not trying to mask over it quite as much. But then, I think any type of, oil-based, primer or paint or, any of that is going to help seal it in and help that, that smell from coming back out. But I know a lot of people that, if it's in, one area really bad, they'll pull it up, and you can tell the subfloors, it's really soaked in, and, they'll just cut it out just to be sure that it's going to be gone forever. They don't, don't want to replace the carpet and do all that and then have the smell come back. But yeah, from you guys, anything else to add or any stories as far as you guys taking care of this, odor problems?
The one that we have is, we had the subfloor treated and all the carpet replaced, and the, I don't know if they didn't do all the carpet tack strips or what, but also the house was repainted. But you can see some areas even on the trim where the trim was damaged from the pet. And so those areas, the smell came back after the paint had time to dry. And so we're kind of already repainted, already did a subfloor treatment, but I don't think the carpet tack strips got hit. And there's just these like problem areas, but they seem to be fairly, around there. So I think we're going to have to sand back down and pull back the carpet and do some retreatment in just those areas where it's messed up. And
a lot of time, you can't, like, painting the carpet strips, may not work, those tack strips, but, at that point, they're pretty cheap. So you just pull them out, make sure you paint good underneath of them, right? And then, but do you have can you tell it's like just in one room, or when you walk in, does the whole house kind of smell like it?
Yeah, but if you really sniff around, you can find where the smell's emanating from. But yeah, there's like 10 different places. I think it's in the grout in a laundry room area. So
Oh yeah. That's another good reason to always make sure all your grout is sealed. Anyways, if it's not sealed, that pet urine will get in there and then you're in big trouble.
Well, let's do a recap and then see if anyone else has any questions. But I love to do a recap. Did you have any more slides, Logan?
No, that was it.
Okay, let's do this. Stop the screen share for a minute. Do a little recap, and then see if that. Okay. All right, we're all back. Okay. So I always take notes from these. So I'm going to try to recap some of the points that I took down from your presentation, Logan. Mm-hmm. We have Logan Miller from Our Pet Policy speaking to AVID Investors tonight. And on pets, more than 2/3 of tenants and people out there have pets. So if we don't allow pets, we are basically ruling out 2 out of 3, more than 2 out of 3 of every renter. And it can be more cost effective to allow pets if you do it correctly. And doing it correctly would mean also not forcing people into going for an emotional support letter, which just about anybody can get these days if a pet is not allowed. So we also talked about the difference between an emotional support animal and an actual proper service animal today. And it's always really important to remember and acknowledge, we don't ever want to disallow someone's emotion. We want people to have what they need. If they have a disability and have a trained pet and need it, it's not a pet, it's an animal, and we're not trying to get around that. But we are trying to get around people who are bringing in untrained animals and getting fake ESA letters. And they're doing that in response to some pretty staunch pet policies out there. So it can be more cost effective to allow the pets to screen or have ourpetpolicy.com screen your companion letters, your emotional support and letters to avoid unauthorized pets, and to implement policies where you notice if people have unauthorized pets, and have teeth in your lease that address pet violations and animal violations so that people know what they're up against if they decide to get a pet, and it's easier not to tell the landlord or decide not to pick up after it. HUD allows letter verification. So on the list of do's and don'ts, if you get a letter, go ahead and verify the letter. It's your right to do so. And let tenants know in advance that those letters are going to be verified. And have a robust animal accommodation form, but don't ask about a disability, because that's now pushing the limits. Now you're getting into people's personal business. And if they have a disability and they have a legit letter, that's all we need to know as landlords. Probably all we should really want to know as landlords as well. And if someone does have a disability, don't charge them fees, because that is not a pet. It's a crutch. It's an animal. It does not adhere to a pet policy, because if it's a true disability, it's not a pet. And so when you're asking that question, can I charge for it? Well, you can charge for pets, and it's a good way to do so. And having a good lease and good pet rules and good pet checking is going to bring you more profits and more possible tenants. But if it's a service animal or an emotional support animal, it's not a pet.
And let me just jump in real quick. Always call it an animal addendum as well. If you call it a pet addendum, then they could always argue that, oh, those rules, that you want a pet to abide by, I don't have to because mine isn't a pet. But if you call it an animal addendum, then that waste management, all those other rules, they still have to abide by those. So
Fabulous. And also, I really liked the point that you made about when you're looking at your decision on how to do deposits, having some of the pet fee be refundable and some of it not refundable. That way, you don't have to prove that that tiny carpet area was a little better before and that's above and beyond normal wear and tear. Some of it you're automatically keeping because the house had more wear and tear, but there's still an incentive for them to be good tenants because they'll get some money back at the end of the day if their pet is a better pet. So AVID Investors, thank you for being here. I'm Stacy McBain with Swope Investment Properties.
I have a question.
Thank you. Okay, more questions. Dave.
Yeah, well, I think that number one, I thought this has really been a great meeting. It's well worth my time. So thank you, Stacy, for putting this on. And I thought that was a great presentation, Logan. Quite informative, very worthwhile. I've been doing this for a long time, but I have had lots of questions. You answered many of them. One of the things you didn't answer much about is what the costs are for the landlord and the tenant to sign up with you. I'm quite interested in doing it, but could you say just a little bit about that?
Yeah. And so once we have all the tools in place, like I was telling you, that pet mapping tool, and then also the curriculum for the tenants, our goal is to charge $5 per month for ones that do have an animal. And our goal is that in reducing the fraudulent emotional support animals and lowering the unauthorized animals, you know, that you're gonna have a return on your investment right there. And then also that curriculum is going to, you know, the tenants are going to learn how to better take care of your property and be more responsible with their animals. That, you know, that'll save on damage as well. So
you charge the $5 a month to the. How does that charge work? Is that charged to the tenant or the landlord, or how does that work?
Yeah. So right now we just have the landlords are covering it. But in the future, we'll have it to where you could opt that it would be a service that the tenant signs up for and that they would pay for.
I had a couple
Thank
of
you.
questions too, whenever. Is now a good time?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's good with Stacy.
What happens when I have it in my animal policy, and I don't know, you know, if I'm on shaky territory or not, but I say something to the effect of if their animal is aggressive or is harmful to any other tenant, then that could be cause for like immediate eviction. You know, how do you handle situations like that where, let's say you have a common backyard and 2 or 3 tenants have to go through the backyard, and they're or I've even been afraid to go on my own property because of specific dogs that were aggressive.
Yes. And so if it acts aggressive, or if, you know, I think you'd, like if the other tenants were saying it acted aggressively, you know, if there is proof, better, right? Because if you go to initiate eviction on someone off of just somebody's word, you know, maybe it could get tricky. But yeah, so we have that written in ours as well, that, you know, if the animal acts aggressively, that, you know, it's in violation with our addendum, and they, you know, they will either need to get rid of the animal or move themselves. Another thing we have as well is when they're signing the pet addendum, there's a check or a box that they initial that says that their animal has never acted aggressively towards someone. There have been several lawsuits to where they said the landlord knew the animal was aggressive and didn't have it removed, and then it bit me. And so the landlord gets sued and usually loses. And so that's just another piece of evidence that you have that, hey, I did my due diligence in making sure that that animal was safe.
How much time do you give them if they've been asked to remove the animal? What's a reasonable amount of time?
So when it acts aggressively, I think we have in ours that, you know, it'll be immediately removed, or that, you know, or the tenant will be evicted, you know, and evicting the tenant, you know, just has to be according to the state law, you know, as far as timeline.
And then how do you address just nuisance barking in particular?
Yeah, so it'll be a violation, right? And then there's a fee associated with it. And then just like however you have the violation set up in your lease, you know, if they get, you know, 2 or 3 violations, then at that point, you would initiate the eviction or however you do that normally with violations.
Can you make any decisions based on the age of the animal? Like, I mean, I do almost everything in my power to avoid puppies, and I actually will say no puppies allowed. Yeah, just what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, we work with one that has that says specifically there's no animals less than 1 year old are allowed, and that's in their animal addendum. And you won't see service animals that are puppies because they have to be trained, and puppies aren't trained. But there'll be a lot of people that try to pull the emotional support animal, version on there, to get a puppy because, the majority of people, when they do get a dog, they will get a puppy. But I've had 3 dogs, total, and right around when they're 6 months old, it always seems like they destroy something. So, I know exactly where you're coming from.
Hey, Bobby, I had one when I was self-managing. I had one in my lease or in my pet, like my application, when it was asking if I accepted, well, now I'll say animals. Wait, no, I don't know if that would apply. Anyway, what I said is all pets need to have a previous like landlord.
Reference?
So only pets with a landlord history. So if they're coming from a landlord history with that pet, then that pet would qualify. And that was to avoid having new puppies.
Oh, that's very interesting. All right,
and then I had a tenant want to add a pet, and they knew the pet policy was only pets with a landlord history, and they really wanted a puppy. But what they ended up doing was finding someone who couldn't move with their pet. You know how sometimes pets need to be rehomed for various reasons, and they were whatever moving out of the country or something. And so they ended up getting someone's pet that needed to be rehomed. And I was able to verify with their landlord that it was indeed a good pet.
I see.
That's
all right, my last question. And that is, what are your thoughts about when there is damage to the lawn? Okay, if it's your carpet, it seems very quantifiable. You fix it, you buy new carpet, you paint, whatever. It's broken and then it's fixed. But with the lawn, it's not quite so clear cut, and it takes a long time for that lawn to rebound. And so how do you decide how much to charge for withholding deposit for something like that?
And I think it depends a lot on the circumstance, right? If it's a single family home and they're 100%, responsible for that backyard versus a fourplex where all the animals, in the unit, are kind of destroying it. Maybe theirs did some, but other animals are contributing to it. But yeah, and I think that's just one other thing you have written in the lease, that they're going to if they're in charge of maintaining it, and then you have, before pictures, and after pictures to show it. And in that case, getting it restored to look as good as it should. Like if they're ending their lease and you're going to be showing it, at that point, you're going to have to, put in some, go have some sod put in to make it look good for the next tenant to show it off. And at that point, it's justified.
So let me give you an example. It is a single family home. It's only their dog, and the dog, you could tell, just paced the fence. And so the rest of the grass is fine, but all along the fence line, there's this trough where the dog, has just compacted the ground. And that's not the bad part. The bad part is at some point they must have had the dog on a chain or something around the tree, and it has ringed the tree. And so I don't know. I'm in the process of trying to save that tree as of last fall, and I won't know for a while whether I'll have like $1,000 or more to try to cut down and remove this tree that's been killed by that dog on a chain around the tree. So what about those things?
Well, remember, Bobby, that you can only charge, this are just a few thoughts that are coming to my mind. You can only charge for expenses incurred. And of course, you've only got 30 days to get them that statement if your lease gives 30 days. Otherwise, it's like 21 or something per Idaho landlord tenant law. So the year thing won't fly because you just won't know. You won't be able to incur that expense within 30 days, and you can't charge them for an expense not incurred. Logan?
Yeah, I would think you would just have to get an arborist to come and look at it and say that tree's going to die, and here's what it's going to cost to cut it down and replace, or whatever you would do, and so that way there's a you have a paper trail for it.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's great ideas. Thank you. I just have to echo what everyone else said. I just had, many of my questions answered that I've been thinking about for a long time or struggling with. So really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank
And
you,
feel free to
Logan.
reach out at any time if you want to, talk through your pet policy. We love doing that, and we love networking, especially here, in the Boise area. So feel free to reach out anytime.
Thank you so much, Logan. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I'm super grateful that we all got to hang tonight.
Yeah,
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
Logan. Thanks, Stacy. That was great.
Yep. Thank you. Bye.
And Logan's email was on the invitation at the top. So great job, Logan.
Yeah, thank you.